So I had an experience. All right, so not a good one. Um, when I was teaching, I taught in Baltimore City, and this is because I think this moment is the reason why I left pre-K through 12, and there's also the moment that it solidified what I believe we need to do in terms of supporting Black males. I saw a principal call the police on a young Black male. I'm thinking, I don't even think it wasn't one of my, I think he was like elementary school. And I couldn't wrap my mind around, and it was for like something, it wasn't something like overtly violent. And at the time, I couldn't wrap my mind around why an adult would call the police on a student. And like I said, it just reinforced everything that I experienced and everything that I read, everything I had written about up to that point in terms of the challenges Black males encounter. So as that particular event was a stressor, right? That it led me to say, okay, I can't do this anymore. And then B, what else do I do? And then thirdly, I was like, okay, so as I develop a research agenda, it's going to have to be focused on some of these issues.
This is Nicholas Hartlip, Robert Charles Billings Endowed Chair in Education at Berea College, and you're listening to EdUp Accelerated Excellence.
Are you listening? Listening is more than just hearing. It's the engine of transformation. When leaders truly listen, they unlock hidden insights and spark meaningful change. The power of listening turns quiet voices into catalysts for educational excellence and equity. That's why we've launched the XE Listening Tour, a journey dedicated to amplifying every voice, especially those least heard from. This week, seek out and listen to a quiet voice, a student, a colleague, or parent. Let us know what you learned about educational excellence or equity from their story and record your experience and insights via voicemail at edupxe.com. Your contribution may be featured on this podcast. Are you listening? We are. Join the XE Listening Tour at edupxe.com. This episode is supported in part by Patriox Ultra High Oxygen Content Water. Drinking Patriox helps oxygenate the body, promoting overall health, energy, and vitality. In 2026, try Patriox on your journey for accelerated excellence. Receive a 10% discount on your next purchase with the code EdUpXE. That's 10% off with the code EdUpXE at patriox.us. Patriox.us. Find more details in the show notes. Welcome to the EdUp Accelerated Excellence podcast for the advancement of educational excellence and equity. And I am your host, Jacob Easley II, PhD, PMP. And today's guest is an expert in the field of policy. And we're going to focus on educational policy and educational justice with Dr. Larry J. Walker, who is Associate Professor and Doctoral Program Coordinator at the University of Central Florida. Larry, welcome to the show. And will you please introduce yourself to the EdUp Accelerated Excellence community by giving names to your voices only you can, and if you can share that 35,000 aerial view of what's happening in your sphere right now. What's top of mind for you?
Yeah, first of all, it's a pleasure to join you today. Look forward to in-depth and conversation during some interesting times, not only in the state of Florida, but nationally and internationally, obviously. So as you kind of highlighted my, kind of where I am academically at UCF, I've also taught at Howard University, held faculty appointments there, Lowell University in Maryland. But in addition to that, we're going to kind of deconstruct some of my policy background working on Capitol Hill, and also have some experience working in pre-K through 12 settings. People are always surprised to realize I have a policy background and also I have experience as a teacher, but it's true. And I think it really grounded a lot of my policy work. As I continue to do a lot of that work as a researcher, presenter, as a writer. But one of the things I want to highlight is I think that's really important about background. I know we chatted about this a few weeks ago, is that I'm from the city of Philadelphia, which has a long history of, Black activism. And I think I would certainly say that in terms of who I am and my orientation is centered in a lot of that. And I'm proud of that background, and I carry that with me here, in the state of Florida, and overall, I'm someone who cares deeply about education, and like I said, look forward to having an important conversation.
So Larry, thank you for that. Philadelphia, Philadelphia, Philadelphia. I said 3 times because Philadelphia seems to keep resurfacing on this show. Jamal Watson is from Philadelphia, who was on the show. Bryce Thompson, who's a young brother now in his first year of teaching, is from Philadelphia. And we had Sharif El-Mekki, who is director for the Center for Black Educator Development. Of course, that organization is in Philadelphia. So as Sharif would say, Philadelphia, city of brotherly love and sisterly affection.
Yes.
Let's start there. So you talked about Philadelphia's unique Black justice legacy. How did growing up in that environment shape your early understanding of what justice or opportunity should look like before you even entered this work of formal policy work?
Yeah, and thank you for the question. So one of the things about interesting is I should add a note to this. So I was born in Camden, New Jersey, which is right across the Brand-Franklin Bridge. My parents divorced. My mother remarried, and we moved to Philadelphia when I was in middle school. So when I talk about, Philadelphia and, growing up the time that I did, it is not only obviously the culture and history, Black history there, but it's also a pivot point for me in my life as a young person. Like I said, my parents divorced and my mother remarried. But Philadelphia really means a lot to me. My aunt still lives there. My sister and mother moved out of that city. Actually, my sister lives in Texas right now. But, I love going back to the city to see, my family, aunt or family and friends, colleagues from college. I went to Chain University undergraduate. So I do get a chance to go back to Philadelphia a couple times a year. But it's such a city, so much rooted in Black history and culture, as I said. It's one of those things when you're in Philly and around Black Philadelphians is that you just kind of immerse yourself in being around good people. I know that people from the Northeast and Philly and sometimes New York are accused of being a bit blunt. But what I always say about people from Philadelphia is they're going to be honest with you, right? They're not going to tell you that something is not true. And in addition to that, obviously talk about history of, the AME Church. I am AME, founded AME Church, the Boule, among other organizations. The other thing about Philadelphia has had several Black mayors, starting with Wilson Good and, Mayor Parker now, Mayor Street in the past. So Nutter, who's also another Black mayor. So the city has a long history of Black mayors. And I think, once again, that speaks to the cultural identity of the city. Obviously, you have a strong Puerto Rican population, white, et cetera. But it is that foundation that still exists today in terms of the Black community. I grew up in West Oak Lane in Philadelphia. So it is in that, like I said, that tradition that I carry me to UCF and to the state of Florida.
So thank you for that. And you mentioned a word that I don't hear that often. You mentioned the boule. So just take a few minutes and enlighten the community on what the boule is.
So I'm not a member of the boule, but the reason I mention it is because I think it's important when we talk about Black excellence, right? So the boule is the oldest Black Greek letter organization in the United States. So I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. So we are clearly the oldest intercollegiate Black fraternity, but the boule is the oldest Greek fraternity in the United States. I said, founded in Philadelphia, of Black professionals who realized that they needed a place and a space and an organization to continue to do some of the work they can do and have a meeting of the minds. And obviously that organization years later continues to thrive. And like I said, it's important when I talk about Black excellence to mention all the aspects of what it means for the city of Philadelphia in terms of what is it produced and what is done to contribute to the Black diaspora, not only in the United States, but throughout the world.
So you mentioned your early work in K-12. So let's just jump back a bit. And before we get to policy, how did you come to the field of education, and how, I guess, instructive was your K-12 experience parlaying you into your profession beyond what we would call, I guess, public or basic education?
It's interesting. My time was split between public school and parochial school, Philadelphia, Camden, New Jersey. But I spent most, like high school was, and when I was all parochial school. I attended Colonel Dockery High School in Philadelphia, which is unfortunately now closed, like a lot of religious, our schools in Philadelphia, our archdiocese is now closed. But in terms of my pre-K through 12 experience, what's interesting? I was an average student. In fact, my family reminds me that often. They don't have to because I remember it. But, it's like families always give you a hard time about things, but especially being a professor now. Mm. But I was a mediocre student, but I think a lot of that in terms of my pre-K through 12 experience was rooted in the fact that I don't think that teachers taught to the things that I was interested in. Let me give you an example. When I got to high school, like I was, and at that time they track students, right? So I was an above average track in like history and religion, and all the other subjects average track. The two subjects that I love the most, religion and history, are intertwined, right? So the classes that dealt with how do we get here, essentially, are the classes that I excelled at. The other courses, they just didn't speak to me. And as I reflected as I gotten older, I realized that it was just those are the top subjects I was always interested in, and continue to center my work in history. The other thing is about, as it relates to my pre-K through 12 experience, I didn't have any Black male teachers throughout that experience. And I know we talk about that a lot in terms of, we know research wise, Black students who have at least one Black teacher are far more likely to be successful. We also know that Black teachers also increase the outcomes of white students and other students, right? So it's really important to highlight that. But not having a Black teacher impacted me. And, the other thing I want to just outline is, I graduated from high school, got into a couple colleges. My parents were like, you're a mediocre student. We're not going to pay up for this tuition. So I actually spent like 2 years working. I attended the Community College of Philadelphia part-time for like 2 years. And then I was like, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I think I'm mentioning that because that's a pivotal moment in my life that's told to Alex Haley, that version. After I read that book and I read about his transformation from Malcolm Little to Malcolm X, I realized like, wow, wait a minute. It really tapped into something within me and says, listen, if he can change his life, and I was doing fine, but I think that I realized that I needed to go back to I attended a 4-year institution full time. And that experience of not having a Black male teacher weighed on me. So I attended Cheney University and majored and graduated a degree in elementary education.
That's how you got to elementary education. But I'm kind of sensing that because you love history and religion, I think, and let's explore this. I think you were deeply concerned about the human and social conditions.
Yes.
And yes. So that might track now to what you're doing. Tell us about those first few years in K-12 teaching after you left Cheney, which is an HBCU. How did that influence the way you began to think about education? And I would say in some ways, educational justice.
Yeah, it's a good point. So actually, after I left Cheney, I went to Howard and got a master's degree in education. It was after Howard that I started teaching in Maryland. I've taught in Maryland, Virginia. So, and also, a short period of time in Florida. So in terms of, Cheney helped guide and shape me into historically is a teacher's college, not anymore. But that experience is important to me. And even after at the time I was graduating, leaving Cheney, I was going to go and, teach maybe in the Philadelphia area. And I came to DC. Actually, I had a former girlfriend who was at American. That was my first experience coming to DC. I think that's important to note. The first time I came to DC was to see a young lady. So I should unpack that, right?
All right.
And so I was like, wow, DC is really nice. And then, as I was finishing up, I said, I think I want to go to Howard. And the interesting thing about Howard University is I didn't have a car at the time. And I was finishing up my student teaching. And I actually jumped on a bus to DC and met with the associate dean who I had been, talking to on the phone, and dean. And as I went to Howard, ended up getting a scholarship, a teaching assistantship, and some other scholarship aid. But it was after I graduated from Howard that I started working in pre-K through 12 systems. I should note before that, I would work in various summer programs where I was teaching young students in Philadelphia and outside the city. So I had plenty of experience working with young people prior to even, during my time at Cheney and, after graduating from Howard. Even when I was Howard, I was doing some tutoring.
All right, so I wanted to take you back to social educational justice through P12, your experiences.
Sure. How
did that begin to shape your thinking about educational justice?
So I had an experience. All right, so not a good one. When I was teaching, I taught in Baltimore City, and when I was teaching in Baltimore, and this is because I think this moment is the reason why I left pre-K through 12, and there's also the moment that it solidified what I believe we need to do in terms of supporting Black males. I saw a principal call the police on a young Black male. I'm thinking, I don't even think it wasn't one of my, I think he was like elementary school. And I couldn't wrap my mind around, and it was for like something, it wasn't something like overtly violent. And at the time, I couldn't wrap my mind around why an adult would call the police on a student. And like I said, it just reinforced everything that I experienced and everything that I read, everything I had written about up to that point in terms of the challenges Black males encounter. So as racial, kind of these social justice issues as it relates to pre-K through 12, that particular experience is all the other things I'm doing, all the reading and writing, graduate school, then teaching, predominantly Black students or minoritized students. That particular event was a stressor, right? That it led me to say, okay, I can't do this anymore. And then B, what else do I do? And then thirdly, I was like, okay, so as I develop a research agenda, it's going to have to be focused on some of these issues.
That definitely makes sense. So you've worked across higher ed, federal policy space, and research communities. What first pulled you into the intersection of education and policy? And I know you talked about this K-12 classroom experience. Was that it? Or, when did you start bridging together policy and education?
So I had to go back. So I have a lot of different varied experiences. So I neglected to mention when I was an undergraduate, I was very active on campus. I was vice president of student government. I was actually appointed student. I was a student representative council of trustees. So what led me to my policy interest, first of all, I was running for student government, right? It kind of starts for a lot of people. Right. And then I found out that Pennsylvania had a legislative fellowship program. And so I had like a semester left. I had to finish all my coursework and all I had to do with my student teaching. I would have finished in the fall, but I was like, that doesn't make any sense. It's kind of an awkward time to finish. So I said, well, I'm going to apply for this fellowship. If I get it in the fall, I'll move my student teaching to the spring semester. So I applied for it. I got it. So I spent a semester working in Harrisburg, which is the state, which is the capital of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I spent a semester working for, at the time, he was chairman of the Education Committee, a Republican. So I worked for him for a semester, and it was really kind of my first time. And one of the final projects we had to draft a bill, and then we have to present it. And I remember one of the Black state representatives from Philadelphia, and he's retired now, and I can't remember his name, kind of took me under his wing, because I was always ambitious as an undergrad. So I would go visit Philadelphia area state representatives and introduce myself. And one of them took me under his wing, and I remember the day I gave my presentation, I think it was like 7 of us in my cohort, and he came and attended. And I remember, giving my presentation when it was related to, like an education bill. And that amount of confidence that I felt standing at that podium, once again, HBCU alum are very proud, right? All the other students are white students and PWIs. And I know based on the conversation that of all the presentations, mine was the best. And not only knowing that, standing at the podium, finishing, but also had the state rep tell me that. So it is in that moment, I think, the political, advocate, scholar or whatever, and then future, political staffer was born in that moment.
Do you happen to, by any chance, remember any of the tenets of your argument?
Yeah, I was arguing. It was centered in the bill importance of supporting underserved communities, and my argument was, and I still make the same point to my students and in my work, is that the United States then and now will eventually become a minority. We knew eventually become a majority minority country, right? So, in order to make sure the economic engine continues to go, you have to invest in the group that's behind everyone else. Well, not behind anymore, because the group is coming hard, it's charging hard. States like Texas are majority minority now, right? Minoritized. So you have to make sure you invest in those communities to make sure the United States continue to be economic superpower.
So I have to say, not bad. I'm talking to your family. Not bad for the young kid who was sort of in the mid range. So to end up having a fellowship with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So you interned later at On the Hill in DC. Through a congressional fellowship. So there's sort of I'm seeing a pattern here, first at the state level, now at federal level. How did that opportunity come about? And what experience did it teach you that academia alone does not or did not?
So it's an interesting story so I applied for the Congressional Fellowship with Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And when you apply to a program, you usually, had to have an advanced degree. And so I initially applied to that program, got it, and actually turned it down because after I finished Howard, I was like, I need to spend some time in the school system. And I remember the person who was in charge of the program, I told her, I said, listen, I know this sounds crazy, but I'm going to wait another year. Actually, I reapplied and got it. And I think in retrospect, when I think about it, I'm very proud of that because the program is really competitive, and it's even grown since I've been a fellow. But applied for it and ended up working in the office of Congressman Major Owens. At that time was 11th Congressional District in New York. He represented Brooklyn, Park Heights, Brownsville. That was at the time the fellowship was 9 months, now it's a year. So I was placed in his office. His chief of staff was Jacqueline Ellis, who's passed away a few years ago, and I mention her name because I cut my teeth. My boss was a civil rights activist, and Jacqueline Ellis was a longtime Hill staffer, and everything I learned in that office, I still use to this very day. And it was a great experience. My boss was a politician, but an introvert, which was really a difficult transition for me. So I spent 9 months as a fellow. I was finishing up my fellowship, and they said, "Hey, we want you to come on as permanent staff." Because essentially, I'm being funded through the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, right? Foundation is paying for me to be in the office. So they would hire me as legislative assistant. I spent 3 months as legislative assistant, handling a couple of policy issues. And then my congressman or chief of staff came to me and said, "Hey, we're firing our legislative director, and we want you to be legislative director." So you have to keep in mind that happened. That was like a year, right? So to put it in context, legislative directors, they run the policy. They run all policy issues, right? You have legislative assistants and legislative correspondents. So a legislative director oversees the entire legislative staff. So I made a major leap from a congressional fellow to legislative director in a very short period of time. And that was very challenging because on the Hill, you either learn or you get fired. And it's quite that simple. And I had to learn a lot of policy issues, foreign affairs, every possible issue you could possibly think about. I had to be well versed in, even though we had other staffers that handled those issues, because when I went to my boss's office, he didn't care. If I told him that he should vote for an amendment on the floor of the House, he didn't care that another staffer handled that issue. He wanted to know right there why I thought he should vote. He should support this bill or amendment. So it was trial by fire, but I survived. So
yeah, anyone who spent time on the Hill with any of the legislative staff, you will know that it is a keen ear of listening, but it is very fast paced.
Very fast.
So one issue, the next issue, you pivot to another issue. So you do have to have that breadth of knowledge, particularly as a legislative director. You mentioned things that you've learned that you still carry with you. So if you could, what are 3 top lessons that continue to shape your work today?
The ability to communicate complex issues so that everyone can understand it. And so the other thing I should add is, as legislative director, I also served as deputy press secretary for about 2 years. So the ability to communicate, like I said, those complex topics, because sometimes you have to explain it to a state, someone from New York City, or the state about an issue they may have an understanding about, but to make it so people understand. There's that communication, the ability to consume and understand information in a very short period of time, because I was constantly, daily consuming information. And then I think the third thing is my ability to negotiate, understand someone else's perspective and negotiate key points. When we talk about legislation, getting people to support a bill my boss had was going to introduce in the committee, or he had introduced in Congress. So lastly, the ability to negotiate and talk to people. And I think it's funny because we go back to when I was in school, the thing I neglected to say is I got in trouble a lot for talking. So I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's also a professor, and I was telling my students this a couple weeks ago, and I was telling them that you always have to be careful when you're interacting with young people, because what may seem like a negative actually may speak to what they're good at. I've always been a talker, and now I'm in a profession where I do a bunch of talking, and I was in another profession, as a pre-K through 12 teacher, or in politics where I talked and communicated a lot. So there you have it.
So speaking of talking, you have an upcoming speech at the Academy of Education that will focus on connecting research to policy. So if I were a doctoral student, and I'm thinking about research and research on perhaps policymakers or research related to policy, what is one practical thing that you would share with me if I'm a doc student thinking about research and policy?
I would look at, whether you're looking at state or federal policies, I would look at the current political ideological shift. What are the long-term ramifications for minoritized students? And so my work is pre-K through PhD. So that's how I see the pipeline. So what, at the federal and state level, these changes, what is it going to mean for minoritized students? And then it's my earlier point about the economic engine, because they're going to drive it. Does it start or does it stall?
And I appreciate your honesty about, you said getting in trouble with one of your talents is being able to communicate, but also getting in trouble for communicating. What would be one of the biggest mistakes that researchers might make when trying to get their findings in front of legislators or staffers, those who make political decisions?
I think that one of the problems is that with academics is that they have a tendency to talk too much, and B, they have a tendency to use acronyms. Just make it plain. And like I said, I'm giving this speech, National Academy of Education, their postdoctoral Spencer Foundation, I think grantees or fellows. So talking to them in DC about and I've been doing a lot of that. My work is making the connection between research, public policy, and the common good. Those three pillars for me right now. So in talking to those individuals or, current doctoral students and or other individuals get in front of policymakers, just make it plain. And also find out beyond them, whatever the bills they've introduced, what are their interests? Like some stuff on their website, you have to personalize the experience. You may have done some research, dig a little deeper than someone else, and make a connection to something, a foundation their wife is on, or their husband is on. So, also personalize the experience. And you don't have much time, so you better make sure. That's why I said don't get too talkative. Just make it be clear and concise.
So I want to ask one question before we pivot a bit, but I've been thinking about this, that all politics are personal in some way.
Yes. Yeah, it certainly is, because the topics that, whether it's a local, state, or federal level, these topics are often very personal for these members, especially if they introduce a bill. Now, look, somebody else might have given, let me be clear, there's some context there. Somebody else, and often sometimes it could be a lobbyist or other policymaker or constituent, give them ideas for bills. But once you introduce it, your name is on it, right? So it is essentially, even if it was someone else, it's like adopting a child. It is now yours. So, but you have to, if you can make a personal connection, if they went to the same university, some kind of personal connection, it makes a difference. I know I've sat in those rooms before, and when there's you sat with lobbyists, high profile other policymakers from other places. If you can make a personal connection, it makes a huge difference. The other point I want to make is staffers do all the work. Right? Having a relationship with a member is probably far less likely than you develop a relationship with a staffer.
Well, thank you for that tidbit. For those of us who often make Hill visits. This episode is supported in part by Patriox Ultra High Oxygen Content Water. Drinking Patriox helps oxygenate the body, promoting overall health, energy, and vitality. In 2026, try Patriox on your journey for accelerated excellence. Receive a 10% discount on your next purchase with the code AddUpXE. That's 10% off with the code AddUpXE at patriox.us. Patriox.us. Find more details in the show notes. Listen. Are you listening? Listening is more than hearing. It's the engine of transformation. When leaders truly listen, they unlock hidden insights and spark meaningful change. The power of listening turns quiet voices into catalysts for educational excellence and equity. We've launched the XE Listening Tour, a journey dedicated to amplifying every voice, especially those least heard from. And we want to hear from you. This week, seek out a voice least heard from, a community member, a parent, or a student. Let us know what you learned about educational excellence or equity from their story and record your voicemail at edupxe.com. Your contribution may be featured on this podcast. Are you listening? We are. Join the XE Listening Tour at edupxe.com. We're speaking with Dr. Larry J. Walker, who is Associate Professor and Doctoral Program Coordinator at the University of Central Florida. So, Larry, in your 2017 book, How the Obama Presidency Changed the Political Landscape, you explored whether the administration reshaped the nation's economic, educational, and political realities. Looking back now, what has been the lasting shift that you see?
So, it's interesting because I talked about history, right? The Obama presidency, absolutely, without a question, first Black president, fundamentally changed this country forever. As someone who centers a lot of my work in history, I think we are experiencing similar what we saw at the end of World War One, and then the Black community experienced the Red Summer of 1919. Consequently, the Coe massacre in Florida, Rosewood, etc. And what I'm explicitly saying is that there has always been a response to Black progress in this country. And I think the Obama presidency, which was limited in controversy, right? There's no major controversial issues besides him wearing a tan suit. This is not to suggest President Obama was flawless. He certainly was not. No politician is. But he was drama-free. He could articulate to you his policy positions. And I would also remind those who are listening, watching, etc., is that he inherited the worst recession in U.S. history and turned it around. Affordable Care Act, I can keep going. That's been dismantled, but the country went from a recession under Bush Jr. to the prospering economically.
And how do you think that has shaped where we are today?
I think that there is a long history in this country of struggling when excellence, or generally just society in overall, is centered within experiences of other people. President and Mrs. Obama, both, obviously his background, her being from Chicago, well-educated, extraordinary Black folks who epitomize Black excellence. I think that there are some people in this country who even may have voted for him eventually struggle with that what America is to be centered within a family that is, a group of people historically that have been marginalized since 1619.
I'm pausing. I'm sorry. That's my pause. I'm internalizing that. So, with the recent hollowing out of the Institution for Educational Sciences, or IES, and the cancellation of nearly 1 million in research contracts. This is by the Department of Education, or Education Department, actually, ED. How should we think about the future of evidence-based policymaking in education in general, but particularly at the federal level?
Yeah, so data is really important. Data drives everything, particularly in our society. It's going to have serious long-term implications. And like I said, I think when I talk to people, when they ask me questions about, you talk about DOE in particular, when I have to explain to them what happens when you start pulling on levers, a lot of times, depending on how interconnected things are, you may not really, and you have those, wedges, etc. You may not realize what is happening way down the line if you're on like an assembly line. So to your point is, there are some serious problems here as it relates. The federal government need to collect, have those individuals who can collect, understand, and interpret data. It also needs to be accessible to IES and all, to folks like us. If we can't access it, how can we figure out how to solve some of our societal issues? So then you become stuck, and that economic engine stalls.
And to follow up on that, though, I'm just wondering, at the federal level, how then, if we've dismantled, for example, IES, how do we assess the effectiveness of our policies for educational equity and excellence?
Yeah, that's going to be very difficult right now. I mean, just to be completely honest, we're in a paradigm shift, and I think that some people get it and some people do not. Now, look, however you view that, we're in a paradigm shift. The country is dramatically changed. So I must tell you, as a researcher, a policy person who cares about the common good, who is also a father, that I am I am committed to making sure my son's future is bright as he has as many opportunities and as bright as whatever opportunities I had. I cannot, in good conscience, and this has nothing to do with academia, the job, right there. I cannot, in good conscience, as a parent, to stand steadfast if I think that his life is going to be made difficult. Not as a parent. And all the degrees and all that other stuff doesn't matter to me. And I'll bring it back to Philadelphia and what I said again in terms of the history of the city. And that is my orientation. So I will continue to fight for what I believe is right in the common good. So how that plays out, we'll see.
And I'm wondering too, with limited access to, I would say, reputable data or evidence, what other mechanisms might exist for us to be able to fact check or to monitor policies for improving educational outcomes? And I'm saying outcomes, and often folks think about, so what happens on a test or an exam, but it's not necessarily what's happening on the NAEP or some exam, but accessing the broad spectrum of positive outcomes.
So as researchers, it's going to be part of it's going to be our responsibility to continue to do the work we do in terms of collect the data individually, and then with colleagues at UCF, we mentioned Dr. Wilkerson, et cetera. It is going to be important to connect with other researchers with similar interests and work collectively together to collect data, analyze it, and publish it. Now, when I say publish it, I don't mean just peer-reviewed journal articles, because I think, I talked before, I do a lot of political commentary. I wrote an op-ed not too long ago for the Orlando Sentinel. So I mean, there's different ways in which you can get that information out on different platforms. We don't live in a society where you just publish an article. That's great, but the reality is only a certain number of people want to read it. There are far greater ways as a researcher to get, and look, not saying it's going to be challenging, but there's so many social media in particular. There's so many other ways I see academics engaging with the public outside of this idea of the ivory tower or this publication game in which we live in, because that's where the people are. They're outside of the ivory tower, and like I said, they're not editors for these journals.
So you're currently in Florida, and so Florida has been in some ways the epicenter of, I would say, sort of the micro experiment of some of the larger federal educational policies that we're seeing. So using Florida as a case study for the shifts we're seeing nationwide, how are these political changes fundamentally altering the culture of higher education, particularly for excellence and equity across diverse communities? So you have book banning, issues around gender or degendering or regendering individuals, silencing them around those kind of issues. So take it how you would like, but how do you think what's happening in Florida is shaping the culture of higher education in particular?
So Florida is at the epicenter of everything you said. It's usually Texas, but this time, the last several years, it's been Florida. So you're right. It's all this started in Florida and Texas, Nebraska, whatever other state you want to identify, and obviously certainly at the federal level. So I think that what we've seen, obviously, in the state of Florida, the legislations that passed, anti-DEI legislation, et cetera, has helped rewrite the rules. Because besides the DEI, but there are other things about post-tenure review, other things, the state changes they had made. So depending on what side of the aisle your ideological views, some people might think that's good, that might be bad, but it goes back to the point is, particularly for faculty members, do they feel comfortable enough having conversations that are really important as it relates to what it is mean to be fundamentally American? And look, when I say fundamentally American, I'm not saying a specific person, but because this country has a wide tapestry of individuals. But specifically to higher education, are we headed in the right direction? And once again, I'll connect it to the economic engine, right? You said outcomes, not necessarily testing outcomes, But let's in capitalism, it is about the economic engine. Let's be clear, it is. And so if we don't have people at the head of the boat, driving the boat in the right direction in the United States, we're going to encounter some challenges. And it'll happen. And I think a lot of things about America I want to highlight also is that I don't think we've done a very good job of, and I talk about, I'm a fan of, I love history, and having people not understand U.S. history, but world history. There are a lot of lessons to be learned outside of the United States in terms of what other countries encountered. And I just don't think a lot of Americans have been exposed to that.
And so let's draw a through line for that. So when you're mentoring students, whether undergraduate or graduate, how do you help them think about impact beyond the classroom?
So one of the things I talk about students is particularly, like I said, I do mostly masters, doctoral students, but I have certain thesis committee for undergraduate and some other undergraduate students who sought out my support. So what I essentially tell them is, first encourage them based on whatever their interest, their work is that go out and look to transform the world. Right? Is this kid who who talked a lot in high school, was a mediocre student? I never thought I'd be working on I'd be at the White House for bill signing or on the negotiating language with the U.S. Senate, with senators, not necessarily members of the House, but even when I negotiated with people in the other chamber, or sitting at this bench or giving speeches. I never envisioned any of this. Right? So I encourage them to go and change the world. There are limitless possibilities. Let's be clear. Depending on who you are, there are going to be challenges. There are going to be barriers set in your way, but no different than our members, our community and family members that had to deal with Jim Crow. And so, go be bold, transform not just the country, transform the world.
I like that thought because it reminds me of something that I heard a long time ago. We used to ask young folks, who do you want to be? What do you want to be? Usually, what do you want to be?
Yeah.
I remember someone changing that question, saying, what problems do you want to solve in the world?
Mm.
And that was just so profound because I think it shifts it still has this agentive sense of agency, but it gives a sense of purpose versus just a matter of doing something and standing in a place. Oh, I want to be a plumber. I want to be president. I want to be a baseball player. But this is, what problems do you want to solve? And that speaks to your mentorship, is change the world, but be a positive influence in the world in some ways if you can. Any thoughts about that question of what problems would you like to solve in the world?
Yeah, you know what? There's a lot of them. It's funny because I really been, like I said, I focus on, I mentioned earlier these three pillars, research, public policy, and the common good. And I made that a part of my focus on my policy background. And just recently, I wrote an op-ed in Orlando Sentinel about, unhoused or homeless individuals. Think about how many problems we could solve if we made sure families, veterans, et cetera, had somewhere to live and thrive and do well. That's just one societal issue by itself. If you solve, you make, students are more likely to attend school, more likely to graduate. We're supporting veterans. We're supporting families that encounter challenging times. So once again, it would also have a positive net income, economic income impact on the nation. So that's just one societal issue. There are a million and one I could talk about, but that's the one at the kind of the forefront of my mind because I just recently wrote about it.
Yeah, that's powerful, and this almost speaks to, we think about issues and what we want to solve, but some of those aren't necessarily root cause issues. Mm. They're symptoms of other matters. So if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of basic needs, when you're you're meeting basic needs, it's sort of foundational to some of the larger other sort of needs. How can you be socially productive when you don't have housing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So where do you see the greatest opportunity right now for scholars and policymakers to collaborate constructively? So you talked about this idea of how we need to get together in the absence of evidence and data, or in a data desert. How do we work together? But what is the greatest opportunity right now, whether it is in collaborating for data or in other ways for scholars and policymakers to collaborate constructively?
So getting together to look at not only understanding what are some of the like contemporary issues, but what are the long-term challenges? Because you have to, for people it's hard, but you have to see beyond yourself. I made the point earlier, people that come behind you, what are some of the challenges they could encounter in a world that will be more dominated by AI? Particularly job loss. There are a lot of people, there are literally millions of people worldwide that are going to lose their jobs over the next several years because of AI in particular. So what do we do from a research policy perspective? And once again, I talked about unhoused, the AI issue by itself, right? What are we going to do about that? Making sure people have the necessary skills to do something else, because we're already seeing corporations lay off people because they're saying, well, hey, the technology can do it. That is going to dramatically increase over the next couple of years.
And for those of us who are in higher ed, we're seeing it now where folks are figuring out how to use AI for accreditation reports, how to use AI to monitor and track student progress. But I also was listening to the news this morning, and folks are going into the courtroom who cannot necessarily afford a defender, are using AI, open AI in particular, to help make a case in court. So, I mean, there are different ways in which you can see how AI can be used for those who might be marginalized or cash strapped in some ways, but you have to have the tools to use it. But at the same time, outsourcing, meaning and displacing certain roles and responsibilities in higher ed and other places.
Yeah.
So if listeners walk away with one insight about the relationship between research policy and higher education, let's stick with higher education right now, what do you hope that is?
I hope that they understand, my point about being bold and transforming, changing, systems have to be changed, but they are pushed back and don't want to be changed, right? So it's not easy, transforming. I mentioned we're experiencing a paradigm shift. So higher education is and will have to continue to change. Who are the people that are going to be and help lead that effort, right? You have the people who have the experience, the knowledge, who also care about the people that come up from behind them.
Dr. Larry J. Walker, what's next for you, and how might the EdUp Accelerated Excellence community engage with this work?
Yeah, sure. So, like many researchers, presentations, conferences, 2 book projects coming out in the next 2 years. But you want to follow me on social media, Instagram, Dr. Philly Alpha, same thing for Threads, and Facebook, Larry J. Walker. Or you just look me up. I'm around. I do a lot of political commentary, Roland Martin, et cetera. So, I'm around. So if you Google me, you can find me. Follow me on social media. Let me know you heard me on the podcast. And, let me know what your thoughts, and I look forward to the conversation.
So, Dr. Walker, I want to thank you for this opportunity to learn with and from you here at EdUp Accelerated Excellence, where we seek to advance educational excellence and equity.
Thank you for that. And, this is Larry J. Walker, wishing everyone thanks for listening, and look forward to engaging and continue the conversation.
Thank you for engaging with EdUp Accelerated Excellence, a member of the EdUp Experience network of educational podcasts. You can find this and other episodes on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Radio, YouTube, and other outlets where you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you like this episode, don't forget to follow us and share within your network. To leave a comment or suggest a guest, contact us online at edupxe.com.
A special thanks to our research assistant, Emma Worthington, a PhD student of Fordham University's School Psychology program. And we want to hear from you. If you have feedback on this or other episodes or would like to nominate a guest, contact us online at edupxe.com, where you can join our XE listening tour and leave an email or a voice message. That's edupxe.com.